Once we begin to understand how routine slowly settles into a relationship, the next step is to examine what routine quietly removes. What disappears is not love, not commitment, and not even care. What disappears is mystery. Desire has a complicated relationship with familiarity. On one hand, familiarity builds intimacy. It allows two people to know each other deeply, to understand each other's emotions, histories, vulnerabilities, and needs. This knowledge creates trust. It forms the emotional foundation of long-term relationships. But on the other hand, desire does not thrive on total certainty. Desire thrives on imagination. It lives in the space where we are still curious about the other person, where we still feel that there is something we do not completely know. In the early days of love, this mystery exists naturally. When you meet someone for the first time, you are drawn not only to who they are, but also to the possibility of who they might be. Every interaction reveals something new. You listen carefully, you observe small details, you ask questions, you are discovering a person. That process of discovery creates energy. It keeps your mind engaged and your attention focused. The other person feels interesting because they are not fully predictable. But as time passes, something subtle begins to happen. Couples often move from discovery to certainty. Instead of remaining curious, they begin to believe they have already figured each other out. You hear phrases like, "I know exactly how you think," or "I already know what you're going to say." These statements often sound harmless, even affectionate. They suggest deep familiarity, but they also reveal a shift in perception. The partner who once felt mysterious is now seen as completely known. The story feels finished, and when the story feels finished, imagination loses its role. Desire, however, depends on imagination. It requires the ability to see the other person not just as they appear in everyday life, but as someone who still contains hidden layers, someone who still has thoughts, dreams, and possibilities that are not entirely visible. When mystery disappears completely, the mind stops wondering. Curiosity fades. The relationship becomes emotionally mapped out, like a place you have visited so many times that you no longer notice the details. This does not mean that couples stop loving each other. It means that the relationship becomes too predictable to stimulate the kind of psychological excitement that fuels desire. Predictability is comfortable, but comfort is not always erotic. One of the paradoxes of long-term relationships is that the very closeness that builds intimacy can also remove the distance that allows desire to grow. When two people share everything, their routines, their responsibilities, their habits, the boundaries between them can become blurred. They know each other's schedules, moods, and reactions so well that nothing feels surprising anymore. But surprise is essential to desire. Surprise captures our attention. It interrupts the automatic patterns of daily life. It forces us to look again at the person in front of us, rather than relying on what we think we already know. Think about moments when you suddenly see a different side of someone you have known for years. Perhaps your partner expresses an idea you never expected. Perhaps they demonstrate courage or creativity in a situation where you had never seen it before. Perhaps they reveal a vulnerability or ambition that surprises you. In that moment, the familiar person becomes intriguing again. You realize that the story was never finished after all. This realization reawakens curiosity, and curiosity is deeply connected to desire. When we become curious about someone again, we begin paying attention in a different way. We observe more closely. We listen more carefully. The relationship becomes dynamic rather than static. Mystery, in this sense, is not about hiding parts of ourselves. It is about recognizing that no human being can ever be fully known. Even in the most intimate relationships, each person carries an inner world that is constantly evolving. New experiences shape us. New ideas influence our thinking. Our desires, fears, and ambitions shift over time. If we remain open to that evolution, we continue discovering each other. But if we assume that everything about our partner is already understood, we stop looking. The disappearance of mystery is often not caused by time alone. It is caused by the belief that there is nothing left to explore. Erotic intelligence challenges that belief. It reminds us that the person we love is not a fixed identity. They are an unfolding story. And when we allow ourselves to see them that way, when we remain curious about who they are becoming, something remarkable happens. The familiar becomes fascinating again. Because desire does not disappear when love grows deeper. It disappears when we stop seeing the mystery inside the person we think we already know. As routine settles in and mystery begins to fade, another transformation often takes place in long-term relationships, one that is subtle but deeply influential. Couples slowly shift from being lovers to becoming managers of life together. At first, this shift happens naturally and even responsibly. When two people build a shared life, there are countless practical matters that require attention. There are schedules to coordinate, finances to organize, responsibilities to divide, and plans to make for the future. Partnership, in many ways, becomes a collaboration. You begin discussing work obligations, household duties, family commitments, and everyday logistics. Conversations revolve around what needs to be done next. Who will take care of this task? Who will handle that responsibility? What time does something need to happen tomorrow? These conversations are not only necessary, they are signs that two people are functioning as a team. But slowly, without noticing, the emotional atmosphere of the relationship can begin to shift. Instead of encountering each other primarily as romantic partners, couples begin encountering each other through the roles they perform in managing daily life. One person becomes the planner, the other becomes the problem solver. Someone handles the bills, someone manages the schedule, someone organizes family obligations, someone takes care of practical details. The relationship becomes efficient. And efficiency, while incredibly valuable in many areas of life, has very little to do with erotic energy. Eroticism rarely emerges from efficiency. It rarely grows out of conversations about logistics or responsibility. Desire tends to appear in moments when we see our partner outside the rigid structures of everyday roles. But when life becomes busy and responsibilities accumulate, the roles themselves can become dominant. Partners begin seeing each other primarily through these functions. You are no longer encountering the full complexity of the person you love. Instead, you are interacting with the role they play in maintaining the system of daily life. The romantic partner gradually becomes the colleague of domestic management. This is why so many couples describe their relationship as feeling more like a business partnership over time. They are cooperating well, they are managing responsibilities effectively, they are solving problems together. And yet, something essential feels missing. The emotional spark that once defined the relationship begins to feel distant, not because affection has disappeared, but because the relationship has become dominated by practical collaboration rather than emotional encounter. In many ways, couples become extremely good at running life together, but running life together is not the same as experiencing each other. Desire often requires moments where partners step outside the predictable roles that routine has assigned them. It requires moments when the other person is seen not just as the one who organizes the schedule or manages responsibilities, but as a whole human being with creativity, playfulness, unpredictability, and depth. When roles become too fixed, imagination disappears. The partner becomes defined by function rather than by presence. Think about how differently we perceive someone when they are fully absorbed in an activity that expresses their personality. Perhaps they are telling a story with humor and energy. Perhaps they are deeply engaged in a creative project. Perhaps they are demonstrating confidence or curiosity in a situation that has nothing to do with everyday tasks. In those moments, something shifts in our perception. We stop seeing the role and start seeing the person. And when we see the person again, the full dynamic individual behind the responsibilities, attraction often returns. This is one of the quiet challenges of long-term love. The more successfully couples manage life together, the easier it becomes for the relationship to revolve entirely around management. Life becomes organized, problems are solved, responsibilities are handled, but desire is not interested in management. Desire is interested in aliveness. It responds to spontaneity, playfulness, imagination, and emotional presence. It responds to moments when the familiar person beside us suddenly reveals something unexpected, something that reminds us of who they are beyond the routines of daily life. When relationships become dominated by logistical coordination, those moments become rare. Partners begin interacting primarily through tasks rather than through curiosity or emotional exploration. The relationship functions smoothly, but the sense of fascination that once defined the connection begins to fade. Recognizing this shift is not about rejecting responsibility. Every long-term relationship must navigate practical realities. Shared lives require organization and cooperation, but relationships also require spaces where the partners can step outside those roles. Spaces where they are not simply managers of life together, but individuals encountering each other again with attention and curiosity. Because the person who first attracted you was never just the one who helped you manage your responsibilities. They were someone who made you feel awake to the possibilities of connection. And when relationships lose that feeling, it is often not because love has disappeared. It is because the lovers have become too busy managing life to remember how to see each other again. When people talk about the loss of desire in long-term relationships, they often assume that something must have gone wrong. They imagine that passion disappears because love has weakened or because partners are no longer compatible. But very often the real cause is far more ordinary and far more subtle. It is routine. Routine is not something couples intentionally create to destroy their relationship. In fact, routine is usually built out of love, commitment, and the desire to build a stable life together. When two people share a home, a career path, a family, and a future, routines naturally begin to form. They organize daily life. They help people manage responsibilities. They create predictability in a world that is otherwise chaotic. Routine tells us what happens next. You wake up at a similar time each morning. You follow familiar patterns of work, meals, errands, conversations, and rest. Over time, these patterns create a sense of comfort. You know your partner's habits. You know what they like to eat, how they react when they are tired, what mood they are in when they walk through the door. This predictability can feel deeply reassuring. It creates a sense of emotional safety. You know where you stand with the other person. You know the relationship is stable. But the same stability that helps relationships endure can also quietly reduce the conditions that allow desire to thrive. Desire is energized by novelty. It is fueled by curiosity, anticipation, and the feeling that something unexpected might happen. In the early stages of a relationship, these elements exist naturally. Every encounter feels fresh. You do not yet know the other person's reactions, preferences, or patterns. There is a sense of discovery. You pay close attention to each other. Conversations feel exciting because they reveal new aspects of the other person. Time together carries a certain intensity because it is not yet part of a predictable routine. But as the relationship matures, life begins to settle into patterns. Responsibilities multiply, work schedules, family obligations, financial concerns, and daily logistics require coordination. Couples begin to operate as partners in managing life. Gradually, spontaneity gives way to efficiency. You stop asking certain questions because you already know the answers. You stop noticing certain details because they have become familiar. The conversations that once felt electric may now revolve around practical matters. What needs to be done? What needs to be fixed? What needs to be planned? None of this means the relationship is unhealthy. In many ways, it means the relationship is functioning well. But functioning well is not the same as feeling alive. Routine can slowly transform the emotional atmosphere of a relationship. Instead of encountering each other with curiosity, partners begin interacting through habit. The person who once fascinated you may begin to feel predictable, and predictability, while comforting, rarely ignites desire. The human mind is wired to respond to novelty. When something is new or unexpected, our attention sharpens. Our senses become more alert. Emotion intensifies because we are encountering something that is not yet familiar. Routine removes that sense of discovery. When every evening looks the same, when conversations follow the same patterns, when interactions are shaped primarily by practical concerns, the relationship becomes efficient. But efficiency is not erotic. Desire thrives in moments that feel slightly outside the ordinary. It appears when something interrupts the automatic flow of daily life. It appears when we see our partner differently than we usually do. Routine, however, tends to reinforce fixed roles. One partner becomes the organizer, the other becomes the problem solver. Someone manages finances, someone handles schedules. Over time, these roles can become so strong that partners begin seeing each other primarily through these functions. The relationship becomes a well-managed system, but systems are designed for stability, not for passion. This is the quiet trap of routine. It creates comfort and reliability, but it can also make the relationship feel emotionally flat. The spark that once felt effortless begins to feel distant, not because love is gone, but because the environment that once fueled desire has gradually disappeared. Understanding this changes the way we interpret the loss of passion. Instead of assuming that something is broken in the relationship, we begin to see that the relationship has simply become too predictable. And predictability, while valuable in many areas of life, is rarely the birthplace of desire. The challenge, then, is not to eliminate routine entirely. Routines are necessary for building a shared life. The real challenge is to recognize when routine has begun to dominate the emotional landscape of the relationship, because the moment love becomes entirely predictable, something essential begins to fade. Desire does not disappear because we stop loving each other. It disappears when the relationship stops surprising us. And this leads us to another crucial truth about desire. Reviving it is not about eliminating routine altogether. That would be unrealistic. Life requires structure. We need habits to manage work, children, responsibilities, and the many logistical demands of modern life. Routine gives stability, it creates safety, and safety in many ways is the foundation of long-term love. But safety alone does not create desire. Desire requires something different. It requires aliveness, it requires imagination, it requires the willingness to step slightly outside the predictable. Many couples believe that if love is strong enough, passion should sustain itself automatically. But passion does not operate on autopilot. Passion needs attention, it needs oxygen, and most importantly, it needs intentionality. One of the most powerful ways to revive desire is not by searching for dramatic transformations, but by introducing conscious novelty into the relationship. Novelty does not necessarily mean grand gestures or expensive trips. It often begins in very small ways. It begins when partners allow themselves to be curious again. Curiosity is the antidote to routine. When routine takes over, we stop asking questions. We assume we already know our partner completely. We believe their reactions are predictable, their stories are familiar, their desires are already understood. But the truth is, no person is ever fully known. Human beings are constantly evolving. Our experiences reshape us, our dreams shift, our fears transform. Even the person you have lived with for 20 years is still becoming someone new. Desire awakens when we begin to see our partner not as a role, but as a mystery again. Think about the beginning of a relationship. In the early stages, we are fascinated by the other person. We listen carefully, we observe, we imagine. Every detail feels interesting because it reveals something unknown. That sense of discovery is incredibly erotic. Over time, familiarity replaces discovery. And familiarity, while comforting, can quietly dull excitement. We stop looking at our partner with fresh eyes. We interact with them as the person we believe they have always been. Reviving desire requires interrupting that narrative. It means creating moments where the relationship becomes slightly unpredictable again. Moments where partners step out of their habitual roles and encounter each other differently. Sometimes this happens through shared experiences that break the routine, traveling somewhere unfamiliar, learning something new together, engaging in activities that require creativity or play. But novelty can also appear in much simpler forms. It might be choosing to have a conversation that goes beyond logistics, not about bills, schedules, or responsibilities, but about dreams, fears, fantasies, or ideas. It might be asking your partner a question you have never asked before. It might be allowing yourself to express a side of your personality that routine has quietly suppressed. In many long-term relationships, partners become efficient versions of themselves. They become the reliable parent, the organized planner, the responsible provider. These roles are valuable, but they can also narrow identity. Desire expands when identity expands. When partners allow themselves to show new dimensions, humor, vulnerability, creativity, ambition, they become interesting again, not only to each other, but to themselves. And this is another important truth. Desire is not only about how we see our partner. It is also about how alive we feel within ourselves. When people feel stagnant, exhausted, or disconnected from their own passions, desire naturally fades. But when individuals cultivate their own growth, their own interests, their own vitality, something shifts in the dynamic. They bring energy back into the relationship. Their partner is no longer interacting with someone who is simply managing life. They are encountering someone who is evolving. Desire thrives in the presence of that evolution. This is why reviving passion is rarely about fixing the relationship alone. It is often about reawakening the individuals within it. When each person begins to reconnect with curiosity, creativity, and personal vitality, the relationship becomes a space of discovery again. And discovery is inherently erotic. Routine tells us everything is known, everything is predictable. Desire whispers something very different. It says there is still more to explore. So if routine has quietly dimmed the spark in your relationship, the solution is not to abandon stability, it is to consciously introduce moments of surprise, curiosity, and growth within that stability, because passion is not sustained by comfort alone. It is sustained by the courage to keep discovering the person beside you, and the person you are still becoming. And sometimes, the most powerful way to revive desire is simply this. Stop assuming you already know the story and start reading the next chapter together.